Hello and welcome back to the Comic Literate Podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, and mangas. I'm your host, soon to be known as Comic Standard. With me always is my frightening co-host, it's Jamie. How you doing?
Never do that again.
I'm doing it next year.
Yeah. So basically, I need to find some way out of doing this podcast in the next 12 months to prevent that ever happening to me again.
What is with the mixed messages? Because last week you were
couldn't get
so
enough
keen.
of it.
Yes.
You gave me too much of a good thing. You let me have ice cream for breakfast, and I'm like, Mum, I feel a bit sick.
The child never blames the ice cream for feeling sick. That Mum's like, "Are you all right?" It's like, "Yeah, no, I'm fine. It wasn't the ice cream. It's something else." It was like,
clearly weren't reflective enough as a child.
No,
Ryan.
we've all had that mate who's been like, "Oh, I had that one kebab, and it really gave me a funny stomach at the end of the night." It's like, "Are you sure it wasn't the 10 pints?" It's like, no, it was definitely the kebab. It was the kebab at the end of the night.
Hey, I've been that guy, and it is always the kebab.
We've all been that guy, and it's never the kebab. it's almost never the kebab, despite the state of some kebab places.
So there is one in Norwich. There is this spot in Norwich that I've been ordering pizza from for years. I will not name it.
Just in case it gets flooded by comic book fans internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. It becomes like a spot. But it's a kebab place in Norwich that does 2-for-1 pizzas.
I think I know what you mean, but go on.
Yeah.
We'll talk about off air.
Yeah. I've been ordering from there for years. Like, maybe since I graduated uni and came back to Norwich. That would be like a solid decade now. And about 5 or 6 years ago, a girlfriend took me in there. And bear in mind, I'd never set foot in the place. I'd always either called them up or used Just Eat. But I started long enough ago that I used to call them. And I stepped foot in the place and I was like, oh, this is fucking foul. I'm not eating here. She was like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, it's got a 1 hygiene rating and look at the place. It's disgusting. And she looked at me and went, Jamie, this is your favourite pizza place. You've been ordering from here for years. And I'd never seen it and I never knew where it was. Do you know what the best thing is?
What?
I got a pizza.
Well, yeah, obviously.
and you know what? It's a fucking roll of the dice as to whether or not that place gives me the shits, and I still order from there.
I mean, that's the next level, because I can understand, like, poor hygiene rating, and, like, depends at what point in the evening that you might be, the fact that you're tempting the idea of a kebab place at all normally means some people are a bit down the rabbit hole already anyway. But, yeah, it's back to the intro that I was doing this in the first place was... because this is the last of this first year's spooky season.
It's the last. It's Halloween today. Happy Halloween.
It's not quite today because it comes out on the Monday and Halloween's on Wednesday or Thursday.
Okay.
So we're close. It's the one before Halloween.
Can you see how deflated I am?
Always. But this one it was just after the Halloween weekend. So people doing Halloween pies would have done them just before this one comes out.
Yeah.
Whenever, however far in advance we're doing this episode or not.
So, because most of you are comic book fans, I would like to propose a competition, and whoever wins, I will send you a highly coveted comic literate medal. So we're
getting medals made. It's happening.
It's the comic literate costume contest. So what I want you to do is, to the email address, send us photographs of your comic book themed Halloween outfits. And then Ryan and I will judge them and we'll send a medal out to the winner.
And if no one's brave enough to send in their costumes, we'll just have to keep the medal for ourselves and just proudly display it as a winning by default.
Yeah, and that would be a really sad day. I really want to send the medal to someone. So
hey, win's a win. Like, I'll take a win by technical, I'll take it.
So comicliterate@gmail.com, send in your comic book themed Halloween outfits.
And the only rule is no costumes that might get you cancelled or fired from your job.
No, but that's its own category.
I mean, put it this way, if you think a costume might get you cancelled or fired, probably best not to do it.
But no, so let's say you need to have your entries in by a week after this episode goes live. So whenever this episode goes live, whatever date that is, a calendar week after then, you need to have your entries in.
By the 6th of November.
Because we'll have a recording. And then we will look through them when we record together, and we'll see what happens.
And because Jamie will be in charge of getting the medal, you either might get it as soon as possible afterwards, or you might get it 2025. Like, yeah, it's depends. One of those between those.
Depends on what my ADHD is saying that day, doesn't it?
Could be one or the other. And that's what makes it the most magical season of the year, because you get it by Christmas. I go, oh yeah, the Halloween thing. And
So I'm not psyched about this week, Ryan. I'm going to be honest with you.
I can understand why. I think your reservations are very well founded, having started this comic.
It wasn't very good.
No, but there's some interesting tidbits, I think, of the larger franchise it's a part of that I think we're going to get into.
So, we're talking about Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yes. And specifically, we're talking about a comic book adaptation of a novel, the first novel that was released by the creator of the original Five Nights games.
I know that much. What the fuck? Like, I've heard of Five Nights at Freddy's, obviously, but I could have sworn I heard about it in the context of, like, a series of YouTube videos.
So that's how it gained mainstream popularity.
But it's a video game, right?
So it's a video game that was popularized because... So the first game, for anyone who doesn't know, the first game, Five Nights at Freddy's, is basically a game entirely built around a jump scare mechanic. So the actual plot of the game is you play a security guard who has been hired for the night shift at this Five Nights at Freddy's, right? I can't remember if the Five Nights at Freddy's is already derelict and empty by this point or if it's active, whatever. I think it's active in the game. But the point is you're the night security guard.
Yeah.
And the other security guard, the day guard, you would assume, kind of leaves a message of like, hey, it's your first night here, make sure to watch the cameras and, conserve the power to keep the cameras looking, and you can also close the doors if you need to. And the reason you might need to is, well, we got the animatronics here and they like to wander around at night sometimes, and that's not that bad, but if they do see you, they might think that you're a costume without an exoskeleton inside of it. So they might try and shove an exoskeleton down your throat, or they might try and shove you into a costume thinking that you are the exoskeleton. Either way, it'll be a violent death for you. So make sure to keep them away from you by closing the doors, which somehow also require battery usage to keep the doors closed. It's a fault of the logic of the game, but it does feed into the whole mechanic. Anyway, the point is
it's all so dumb.
Yes, and I should stress, this is a young adult franchise of kind of horror or horror adjacent. I mean, it involves dead kids, so it's definitely in that. I don't know if that requires a trigger warning or what.
Why is it that everything we've read for spooky season involves dead kids in some capacity?
I think Maniac didn't.
No.
The neighbors didn't.
Kind of dead kids.
I mean, not technically. I mean, no kids died, so that's a plus. And what else did we do? We did harrowing, very dead teenager, stressing, very, very on that. Spider-Man, just the death of a franchise, a comic book character. One more day, and this is a very heavy dead kid themed franchise. But what I will say is, I would debate it or not. Does this deserve like a trigger warning or not? Does it require one? And I think it's such like a crazy, fantastical world of like kids, souls of children inhabiting animatronic. I'm gonna ruin that word in a while. Animatronics.
Yeah, well done.
And that's kind of, and there's I think it goes a bit too fantastical. Like it's not close enough rooted in reality, and this comic sure as hell isn't. To require anything like that. But the main thing is that games first started, and then basically YouTubers would play the game and, broadcast themselves playing it and getting scared by it. So it grew in popularity that way.
Oh, no. I thought that they made like a short, like a series of YouTube videos set in the world, like a dramatization kind of thing about it.
Not that I know of. So the most famous points of this known is people playing in the game and on YouTube.
Yeah.
Most famously, Markiplier is like the king of Five Nights in terms of player.
Markiplier.
Yeah. And then you've got the lore side, because within these games, and there's like 7 or 8 of them out now.
Yeah.
They would have this backstory lore that would come through like, subtle ways that became way less subtle as the way.
So is Charlie part of the lore then?
I mean, within the book lore, which is its own kind of part of everything.
Right, so the books,
not in the games.
The books and the games aren't canon then? They don't form one set of
canon.
There are
literally hours of YouTube videos that debate whether stuff is canon or not. And I know that because I've watched them.
Have you played the games then? Are you a fan?
I've not played the games. I'm not a fan of just jump scare mechanic based games. By the way, if you can hear meowing, it's the cat. I mean, I don't know what else it could possibly be. You probably know that already. But for any new listeners, there is a cat that meows.
Yeah, she's very vocal today, so you're going to hear her throughout the episode.
there's worse things to hear in the background of a podcast. We could be eating like crisps or something, which would be far worse.
So generally, I make an effort to keep her quiet. Today, that's just not an option, unfortunately.
Yeah. So there's meowing in the background.
Yeah, and it will get louder and it will get quieter. Me taking her into hand is the way to keep her out of the way as much as possible.
Yes.
So we're just going to have to deal with that in this episode, unfortunately.
Not swatting at mic leads or the microphones themselves. But yeah, so there's loads of lore-based YouTube videos. The ones I watch are from Game Theory, MatPat. And the reason I watch them at all is at the beginning, I was like, oh, they've put this like interesting backstory into this like simple game, like horror game. And you know me, anything horror based, I'm like, let's have a gander. And it's just gotten so ridiculous. The main guy writes it. So one of the authors we're about to talk about, a guy called Scott Cawthon. He made the first game just as a kind of like, here's an indie game I've made. Like millions are made every year. I don't know if that statistic is correct. But
there's a bunch of
them made every year. This one just got a bit of traction and is now a successful franchise that has a film coming out, like an actual big budget film.
This is the thing. My research mostly went down the rabbit hole of they've really struggled to get a script together for this film.
Yes, and probably the reason for that is because the actual lore of the games, and just the games alone, not even counting the books, it's not even dense. It's all over the place. It's in like eras, and it's only been going for like 10 years, but it's in like
well,
eras.
It started in 2014, so we're 8 years in.
So it's in like eras, and there's so many like unpaid off things, and there's things that are never like dedicated, like solved or addressed or explained. So there's so many things that fans are like arguing about each other. Like this character is this younger one from earlier? Like that's the one from the Bite of 85, and that's that character grown up now, and that one's the dead, but the soul of that one went into that animatronic, and there's actually two souls that mix together. Like it's just that constantly. And it's fine if you want to go that complex, but you kind of either need to like either pay stuff off or at least the speculation isn't like the main, like give your fans areas to speculate, but it's not like the root thing, you know?
It's a lot of it just headcanon for people then.
It has to be, because there's so many blank opening parts. Like there's mysteries raised in some of these games, and then they're just, again, never paid off or never, and not through lack of like they're forgotten about, like they're hinted at afterwards.
Yeah.
But it's basically what's happened is, I think this guy, Scott Cawthon, just never anticipated it being as successful as it has been. I think he thought, oh, this one's been really successful, I'll get another couple out of it. So he did like 2 and 3, and they're very similar in the mechanics, very same again.
Just more of the same, right?
Yes.
Like people like this, I'm going to give them more of it.
Yeah, exactly. But built on a bit, there's a natural sequel kind of things, and they build on that story. And then there's like the next era starts where there's like a new levels of these games, and there's a whole nother kind of story based on the way the previous one ended, if you can call it ended. Like that's a strong term for this franchise. And now we're in like the third era of it. Basically, to sum up, the first era, very magic based, souls of kids based. There's also a metal that conducts souls or personalities that make the animatronics. There's a couple of inventors who started the franchise, and one of them was a good guy, maybe Charlie's dad. The other one's the bad guy who we see in this comic.
Security guard Dave.
Yes. And
who, by the way,
sure,
the moment we meet Dave with his spiral eyes, it's so obvious that he's the fucking killer.
It's pretty evil, yes.
Yeah, like the moment you meet him with his spiral eyes and his like wide-eyed glare, you're like, yeah, there's something wrong with that guy.
And here's another thing. This comic, the fact that he is the killer and then dies, completely puts a spanner in the game's like backstory.
Because the first thing in the game, you play the security guard, right?
No, so the leading theory is, put it this way, anytime you ask any question, I'm going to have to recall which YouTube video explained which part and then give you like a briefer synopsis.
Oh, God, Ryan.
In the first game, the leading theory is that you're the son of the bad guy and you're kind of trying to fix his mistakes. But here's the thing. If we take this book as this comic book adaptation of apparently a New York Times bestseller, which I'm never been more fascinated to read a book than I am to try and read this New York Times bestseller to see how close the dialogue is to this comic book. Like, I would love to know how close it is.
I mean, something doesn't need to be good to be popular.
No, and bestseller can obviously just mean a lot of people bought it, which is fair enough.
Well, that's exactly what.
But I feel like the New York
means.
Times might, read this book and be like, we can't put our name to this. Like,
Well, but
if the dialogue is the same as a comic, I should stress
that's not how the New York Times bestseller list works.
I mean, I think, as far as I can tell, it's not exactly rigorous. Like, I think people could buy to be on it or stuff.
No, it's literally just how many books you sell.
Right, but the New York Times, like, they don't have. Well, if I was them, I wouldn't have an ownership to be like, if like some really bad book or if a really, I don't think the word, controversial book was like number one bestseller, I wouldn't. If I was the New York Times, I wouldn't be eager to be like, put New York Times bestseller on it. Do you know what I mean? Like, surely they have some choice, like whether to endorse a book or not.
No, because they're not endorsing it. It's just, it is a list of which books are selling the best in America.
All right, so if
that's all it is. It is literally about which book has sold the most copies in America that week or month.
So they're the official arbiters of like book sales.
Well, I don't think they're official, but that's what that list is.
Do you think if there was a really controversial book, and I'm not about to start guessing or making suggestions for what that would be, but I'm just, you can imagine, anyone listening can imagine what a controversial book in their mind is, or the most controversial could be. I mean, it's not controversial that he thinks that, it's just that we all hate him unanimously. Most reasonable people hate him for it anyway. But whatever you can imagine being the most controversial thing that like 50% of people would hate you for endorsing and the other 50% would love you for it. Like that kind of, some would like boycott the New York Times if they put their name on it, and the other half would like love them forever.
By the way,
would they still do that?
The name that I used and the fake book title I made up, that needs to be bleeped out. We cannot have that man's rage focused on us. So,
I couldn't give a shit. He's just going to tweet, and I don't even have Twitter, so...
No, me neither. But
cares?
Again, we don't want that. We don't want that shit.
I mean, I'll bleep out for you as the suggestion, but I'll cut this out as well. But I'll just...
No, leave the discussion about it in. I just don't want that actual person's name to be heard coming out of my mouth.
Okay, well...
I shouldn't have said it.
I'll say for one thing, he's a prick. Like,
hey!
Uncontroversial. And pretty brave of me to say it if I do say so myself.
Oh, very brave. No, I imagine that if it was popular... I mean, there are different categories, aren't there?
You're talking about someone who doesn't know anything about books, so I'm genuinely asking you this stuff.
No, I think the New York Times bestsellers list is literally just them reporting on which book is selling the most.
I thought it was like Oprah's thing, because I did hear Oprah's thing was very much like a book of the week, kind of like, if you get the Oprah book, then...
But that's called Oprah's Picks, and it's literally just her picking a book.
Yeah.
Whereas the New York Times bestsellers list is a list of the top 50 books in order of which one sold the most copies to the fewest copies.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, is like, are they keeping to the ethics of like, we must report the factual numbers of the books that are being sold? Well, I don't know, because the New York Times, they're just a newspaper to me. Like, we don't get it here in Norwich. We get the equivalent of the Norwich Times, and it's normally like, seagull attacked a man and he punched it or something.
I will never forget when I was a student in Manchester, me and my friend used to send each other the headlines back and forth. So he would get a copy of the EDP and show me what was on the front page, and I would show him the Manchester, it might even just be the Manchester Evening News, and it was always so funny, the sheer difference between what was making headlines in Manchester and what was making headlines in Norfolk.
I think at one point I've genuinely seen one that was like, man's been blown over by strong wind.
The one I'll never forget, and this is really tragic, he sent me the front page of the EDP that day was a bloke who had a bunch of frogs stuck under his deck, and the one in Manchester was a student who'd gone missing. And it was like, fucking hell.
Pretty different. And that might just be down to like population size.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
What's going to filter as the most important
down to that
one.
But no, it's kind of wild that this hit the bestsellers list, because, I mean, the internet does have this really fascinating capacity to take traditional pieces of media that are of interest to them and push them to the top of these kind of lists. Like John Green's books were a really great example.
Right. And that's he started off, he obviously developed fame on the internet from YouTube, and then I assume he was just like, hey, I've got a book out to all his internet fans.
Yeah, so he was a novelist. He was a published novelist.
Right.
But his books were not in the New York Times bestsellers list. They certainly weren't at number one. And when he published Paper Towns, he had an audience on YouTube, and Paper Towns did notably better than Looking for Alaska had done. And by the time The Fault in Our Stars came out, his YouTube audience pushed that book into the fucking stratosphere.
Right.
Like, it was at the top of the New York Times bestsellers list for weeks and remained in the list for years. And so it kind of makes sense that something that has a cult following like this on the internet, that they would be able to drive enough sales of a physical book to get it into the bestsellers list.
And it's interesting how much of a transfer there was from, like, look at this YouTube video of a YouTuber getting jump scared by a game, and then going like, I want to read a novel of the lore of the backstory of these games. Like, it's interesting.
Yeah,
the
it is a jump, isn't it? I agree.
And just so we mention as well, there's also credits for this comic to a Claudia Schroder, who apparently is the art. I'll say, I don't know if it's specifically penciling or illustration, but yeah, art, shall we say. She's the only one credited with the art, so let's say all the art. And a Kira Breed-Wrisley, who may have helped write the novel, or maybe just the comic. It doesn't specify. But those are the people who credited with the comic at the very least. And I think...
What did you think of the art?
That was an interesting one to kind of discern, because it's a very unique style. And...
super cartoony.
Very cartoony. I feel like it's this odd art style for the topic.
When I then looked at footage of the game, it was quite clearly a massive divergence from the way that the games look.
Yes. At best, I can say there's a bit of at times, there's a bit of a creepy juxtaposition between what's happening in the page and the art style. So, like, when it is quite a cartoony thing, when sometimes there's little bits of, like, dread or ominous feeling, and the juxtaposition of the cartoony style with that can work at times. But I thought for the most part, it felt very odd, and it felt unsuitable for the topics that was happening. Like, when they're trying to do these meant to be scary parts later in the comic, it felt a bit like, yeah, but this is cartoony, and, you know, it didn't really fit.
Cognitive dissonance,
yes,
is the expression that I would use for it.
Experiencing the kind of two opposite things at the same time. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The art sat in quite stark juxtaposition to what was going on the page.
Yes.
But again, the whole tone of the comic book was really not very well nailed down.
I mean, it was all square speech and thought bubbles, which...
Oh, yeah, it was, wasn't it?
Which just felt like a intentionally contrarian kind of attempt, like, thing to do.
We're doing something different.
Yeah, and I know maybe I don't know of any other comics that explicitly only do squares.
Can't think of one. It was... So, yeah, I mean, to actually, let's get into the art style. Let's really talk about it. So, look, very bright, lots of quite bold colour.
Yeah.
Which, given that most of the comic book is set in a disused, like, derelict building, it felt too bright. Like, it didn't really feel like they captured what they were trying to capture.
No, the dingy, derelict parts were just dark. Like, that was it. But it felt like this is the kind of story that I think would have benefited from art style of Maniac or Neighbours or something like that.
Well, and this is the thing, isn't it? A lot of the horror stuff we've read has had this very kind of realistic, quite gritty art. Whereas this went for something much more cartoony, and I feel like it missed the mark a little bit. I liked the way the characters were rendered. So I thought they were all quite expressive, and the character models themselves all looked distinct. I could always tell who I was looking at. Which, again, you'd think that would be a given with comic books, but it's not necessarily been a given with everything that we've read, is it?
No, and that is definitely a point. I do think that the characters being, like, looking different enough to be recognizable is something that we wouldn't even consider of being an issue until we read comics that didn't do that a good enough job of that. Ones, and I think there's a couple of others as well, which, again, if you do everything else great, this could be like the one thing you don't do well. The fact that it does this well, like, the characters are very recognizable. I think the art delivered on what it was asked to do.
Yeah.
What it was provided to do, it did that job. I feel like I described it as being too cartoony. I feel like maybe if it was more cartoony or a bit more over the top, bright and cheerful, that would have maybe worked a bit better with the horror elements.
It was a bit middling, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it felt very, very simplistic. I feel like this might have been like in terms of like the larger shots of like buildings or backgrounds, this was probably some of the simplest art we've ever seen.
Super low detail, and it wasn't. And I think the thing that makes it super low detail is that it wasn't particularly heavily shaded, and so there's a lot of like big blocks of color, which again just makes something feel like it's not been rendered in much detail. And again, that's clear. Like it's clearly what they were going for. It's not like John Romita Jr.'s Spider-Man, where he was very obviously aiming for something and not hitting the mark. Like, it absolutely hits the mark for what it was aiming for, doesn't it?
Yes, the character the proportions are within the style, consistent style of like these cartoony proportions.
Yeah, and the characters are proportioned really well, and the backgrounds look okay. I think the animatronics themselves look good.
Well, the animatronics, they had, it's like you've said before, they had that ready to go, and they just had to transfer them into this style.
Yeah.
So they already had like, these are what they look like, you've just got to put them in here.
And I almost get the feeling that, and again, if you are Claudia, what's her name?
Claudia Schroder.
If you are Claudia Schroder and somebody tweets you this podcast and you listen to it and us being very critical of your artwork, please tell me if I'm wrong or not, but it kind of feels as though because the core of the intellectual property was those animatronics, those puppets, the whole art style was built from them out because they are probably the best looking thing on the page at any point that they're there.
But then from the first game, I remember specifically, and also the games after as well, those ones have more of a darkened, muted color look, which you could have gone, I think, in different ways.
Yeah.
Like, there's some comics I think we've read where it's like, or in best thing, Spider-Verse, Beyond the Spider-Verse, the Miles Morales film.
Yep.
When they're jumping between universes in that, or you're seeing characters from different universes, I feel like you could take the animatronics and you could take that design and then go any other way. But the video games was 3D modeled, like kind of realistic-ish look. And this is very cartoony look. So I feel like you could go in any way. You could define the style and you could use those as like maybe a key point. It's like, here's what these animatronics look in this style. Yeah. And then someone's gone, right, we'll go with that, make the rest of the comic now that style.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
So that like the way that they could just be transferred into any style almost.
Yeah, no, they could have taken it to a different place. And I think one of the things that we've commented on being really effective in the horror genre over the past like 4 weeks that we've been doing this now is that the art style is really cognizant with it.
Yeah.
And when the art style is really congruent with what's happening in the story, that's what makes something like Maniac or Neighbours as effective as they were, even though Neighbours wasn't quite as effective as Maniac. But here, the art style is super incongruent with what's actually the story that's being presented.
Yeah.
And again, like, I agree with you. I think it's an interesting creative choice that they've done that, but I don't think it hits the mark for me.
Yeah, and that's, for me as well, the simplicity of it kind of was always like a drawing thing. Like, it always kind of shifted my attention. And I just want to be clear, anyone's art of any comic is 100 times better than anything I could ever, like, I always feel need to be like, I respect anyone's ability to make and produce a comic book in any sense. So when I say I'm not like, I never want to feel like someone's like just taking a piss or whatever, just trying to give like here's how, as a reader, I experienced it on this end.
Yeah.
So it's definitely way better than anything I could ever make, but that's...
Yeah, but we're not artists.
No.
And you're allowed to have a critical opinion about something that you can't...
But some of the backgrounds felt like... And again, this isn't... this sounds like an insult. I hope this comes across as like a very like-for-like comparison. Some of the backgrounds felt like they were made by a very talented person on like Microsoft Paint. Do you know what I mean? Like an extremely talented person.
The level of that burn.
Again, I think the colors and the contrast, that feels like that Microsoft Paint's like thing. And also it's the way that the lining and the stuff, very kind of hand-drawn, like, or it feels kind of like hand-drawn, like lines and stuff that I think you would do in like a computer program. When I say Microsoft Paint, I just mean like any computer-based drawing.
Oh, well, this is 100% obviously drawn digitally. This isn't painted, is it?
I do think the panel layout is, I would say, is a negative choice.
Oh, did you not like it?
There's a lot of white background where they have a character doing something, but they don't bother putting in the background. And that kind of distracted me quite a bit. And then the actual like panels is sometimes it works with like the larger panels, and sometimes it again there's so like almost every other page has like just a white background part. So
I don't remember the white backgrounds. Can you show me? Yeah, so I hadn't noticed the white backgrounds, but now that you point them out to me, they are galling, aren't they?
Yeah, and again, there's some interesting stuff with some of the backgrounds, especially in the indoor background parts.
Yeah.
Where the colors become a bit darker and more muted, and that's where the terror kind of meant to intentionally rise up a little bit. And then you've just got a white background, which almost kind of brings too much brightness
but
in.
We've got a story where you're expecting jump scares, right? And so a whole aspect of that is where characters are in relation to the things that are chasing them.
Yes.
And if you put them on a white background, you take away a sense of that. And so I can see why you might want to do that, but I don't. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's an interesting creative choice, isn't it?
The only thing I could think is it just saves you a panel doing the background for.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a bit like callous to be like, oh, they probably did it because of that. Like, I don't want to think that's actually it. It's just the only possible reason I could think of.
Who publishes this? Do you know? Because I think that'll give us an indication as to how much money was spent on it. Because this is the other thing, isn't it? Is that this is being made by an indie game developer who went on to publish a few novels. And I imagine there was a few quid floating about from one of the novels hitting the bestsellers list. But even then, a lot of the stuff we read has a huge budget because the company that makes it is owned by Disney.
Apparently published by Scholastic Incorporated publishers. Ooh, I don't know nearly enough about book publishing to know if that's significant or not.
Scholastic are a publisher that publish a lot of textbooks.
I mean, maybe somewhat related.
I think there's a Scholastic book right behind you.
I mean, there's a bunch of books right behind me. So,
well, yeah, we do record in front of my bookshelves, don't we?
Although, bit of a relief for us and listeners alike. Apparently, the book is a work of fiction, so we can take solace in the fact no animatronics coming after us.
Not yet.
Well, not currently. I mean, AI. The fact that I should have mentioned, I forgot to mention earlier. You know, I said about there's eras of the games.
Yeah,
we're in the era now of the evil AI. Like
Friday,
Five Nights at Freddy's has got to the evil AI part.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? But oh god,
I mean, if I explain to you how they got there, you might not be saying it makes as much sense then.
I don't think I want to know.
You probably don't. I'll send you a link to an hour-long YouTube video, and that'll tell you there.
Which I'm definitely going to spend an hour of my life watching.
Absolutely, then I'll quiz you afterwards. Did you pay attention to the part where, that kind of thing?
Did you pay attention to the part where Freddy used a butcher's cleaver instead of an 8-inch chef's knife?
I don't think he actually uses weapons.
Oh.
I mean, I don't think so. He has a guitar that he plays like as an animatronic, but I don't think he's ever used it as a weapon.
So, is the fact that some of the suits just like shank you up canon?
What, as in attack you or attack people?
No, that you can put a suit on a human and then from the inside it shanks them up.
So here's the thing. That was a big part of, I think, the third game.
Right.
Where it was revealed that that's what happened to an evil character. So in the games, you are a security guard just trying to survive the night and make it through the week.
Yeah.
And then it evolves a bit more in the slightly different settings, but with the same basic mechanic, right?
Yeah.
And then the backstory is like in these like mini games that you play in between levels.
Right.
So it has like an 8-bit game where it's like, oh, you're playing as this weird character. And like, oh, there's like a crying child. Like that's going to be big.
Context there that you're playing the arcade games that are in the...
No, it's genuinely like you are just playing these games as like mysterious shows of the lore and backstory. Like it's not canon that you're playing the games or anything. You are just secure. It's just like you've completed this level. You're about to start the next level. Oh, it's gone static. Oh, you're playing a game. It's all mysterious. What's going to happen? Okay. Then it jump scares you at the end of the mini game.
Delicious.
But the point is, the bad guy who, again, what I said earlier, this may or may not break the canon of the games by trying to incorporate this or not. But that bad character had that thing happen. So he's basically being cornered by the souls of the kids who he murdered, who were trapped in the animatronics. And in the mini games, you've played a spirit of one of the kids who's actually helped. These mini games you play to get like the good ending. And the good ending is the souls corner the bad guy, make him go in the suit. And he's like, haha, you can't get me in the suit. And then it turns out the spring locks go and he gets killed like in this.
Okay.
The problem is, if you include this, then either one of them is wrong, like one of them is the wrong way it happened and one of them is the right way, or the exact same thing with different named characters happened in a Fazbear Freddy's Pizzeria. So
yeah,
the fact that it happens in the game one way, but then happens this way in another way, it's like,
oh god,
exactly.
Messy.
I think the best explanation, which kind of solves everything, is this is a story from within the universe, but not the same canon. So, like, in the sense of, like, you know, Marvel and Ultimate Marvel, like, it's all Marvel, but they were different universes.
Star Wars and Star Wars Legends, all that stuff.
But I don't think they're quite getting into, like, we've crossed dimensions. Oh my god, it's Freddy Fazbear from Earth 26 or whatever. Like, I don't think they're going that. I mean, they might. They might do it. Is that how the
Star Wars stuff worked? I thought they made it so the novelizations are myths that happen within the.
That's the Star Wars way, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's done this way. Again, I think these are just.
Oh,
stories
when you were talking about Earth 27, you were talking about Marvel, weren't you?
I was just general, like, I mean, Rick and Morty, like anything that does interdimensional stuff, or like this story takes place in another dimension. I think this is just generally like the books are their own thing and the games are their own thing.
I mean, I think it's interesting when you get franchises that get to a point where they have like tiers of canon. Because there's a few that I hold quite dear to me. So the Song of Ice and Fire, there's a lot of canon there and a lot of lore. And that becomes really dense. And, you know, like, you need to read Fire and Blood, and you need to read the Duncan Egg stories, and he's released companion books, and there's just a world of shit that you have to get through, and then the you know, the cat things that are canonical in the books aren't necessarily canonical in the TV show, and it becomes really dense, and I think that level of richness is really interesting once you're in the weeds of it.
Right.
But if I am on the outside of a franchise looking in, like I am right now, and somebody presents me with all these tiered levels of canon, I sometimes go, you know what?
Just too much too early on.
Yeah, I don't want this.
Yeah, and I'm in no way advertising you should get on board or anything. I'm just telling you, like, we are dipping our toe in this franchise. I'm just kind of giving you, like, here's what it's generally like.
And I think it's interesting because that example, Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, they're 6 very long novels with a bunch of prequels, and it's canon that's very carefully tailored by one guy, right? But what we're talking
carefully is a strong word to use in this instance.
Well, George R. R. Martin. No, George R. R. Martin.
I thought you meant Scott Cawthon in this.
No, I mean in Song of Ice and Fire.
Right.
George R. R. Martin's been really...
take that back. I thought you were talking about Five Nights.
Yeah, George R. R. Martin's been really careful about the canon and the lore and the history, and he's done a really great job of presenting it through other texts that go alongside them as companions and stuff like that. But this seems to be fan-driven.
This is very, very much so, yes.
And I suppose it puts us in a wider discussion about what the internet is capable of. People on the internet en masse, when they get interested enough in a topic.
I'll give you some examples of like what this kind of franchise, like, it's making, like how it kind of comes across. For one thing, I suspect that these books and novels that this comic is based off, and all the other ones, I feel like the only reason they're popular is because they're about the franchise and story that people are already a fan of.
Well, yeah, of course.
But what I'm saying is I suspect the writing quality is below par. We would have to read some to kind of fully verify, but I feel in my gut like that. If I was a betting man...
A cash-in novelistic adaptation that isn't very good, Ryan.
Is it a cash-in if it's by the person who made it originally?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're cashing in on their own idea, aren't they?
In a sense, but what I will say is apparently he does use the lore. He does set up the lore in like future games in the books. So people like guess the next game or stuff in it, and they'll refer to the books, and they've gotten it right.
So if I'm being less cynical in the way I approach this, it makes a lot of sense that somebody who had created that would want to experience it in a bit more depth themselves.
Yeah, and making some accompanying text to expand the lore and backstory.
And I suppose, you know, you've done everything you can or done everything you want to achieve with the games, and you go, but people still have an appetite for this idea. What is my next creative project?
Yeah.
Fuck it, I've always fancied writing a novel. Let's have a pop.
Yeah. And he's wrote like 10 of these novels, so...
So really the novels are becoming more his kind of work.
Yeah. But here's the thing, and I've got a couple examples of this kind of stuff, right? Some of the books I think are like more anthology stories, so like three stories of within this universe.
Yeah.
One of them involves, I shit you not, and I just remembered this, and I'm glad I did, a time-traveling ball pit. That is not a joke.
Okay.
That is one of the stories.
Okay.
Even some of the fans are like, why? To that part. It's still kind of horror themed, still involves the animatronics and the pizzeria, but someone literally time travels. And he hasn't really explained why there was a bit of time travel.
Do you know what? If you're going to write a time traveling ball pit into your Chuck E. Cheese themed horror series,
yep,
I think the best thing you can do is not explain why you would do that.
It almost at this point feels like it'd be worse if you attempted a mild explanation.
Yeah,
like,
because to be honest,
there was a nuclear reactor next door, and it just kind of leaked into the ball pit somehow.
Well, when you get once you get into the weeds of time travel in fiction, you then have to make some big choices about the way time travel functions.
Are we
in
doing
your franchise.
Back to the Future? Are we doing Avengers?
Are we doing Harry fucking Potter?
Yeah.
Like, there are times when it functions really quite well. I would say the Avengers is one of those. Like, they do a relatively good job.
Yeah, they set their own rules.
Back to the Future is questionable. Like, the kid hitting on his own mum, man. That's just dark.
Am I right in thinking Back to the Future is essentially just, it can happen because it's already happened?
Yeah, kind of.
They don't really change. They don't change anything. They do it as it was always meant to have happened. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, even the derivations are like, no, that because you succeed in the end because you wouldn't exist if you didn't. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's the way, you know, that the general consensus is that's the way that time travel would work.
Yeah.
Like, if you exist in a universe where time travel is possible, then you having traveled back in time is already part of the timeline you were in, and so you doing that is necessary to maintain the timeline.
You can't create a paradox, you can only experience a paradox that was always there.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas Harry Potter, bad.
Isn't that as well?
No, Harry Potter's bad soup. Like,
but isn't the whole Harry Potter thing is like they time travel because their future selves already did it.
Oh, yeah, I suppose. So that's that one. And then, so that's that method of time travel. And then I suppose Back to the Future is one where you can create paradoxes, isn't it?
I think Back to the Future, the paradox is already there.
So maybe Harry Potter does a great job of it. Maybe J.K. Rowling... Oh, I don't want to have a positive opinion about J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, but if she just took the Back to the Future format, it's not like she created it.
Yeah.
I thought Avengers did a good job of being like, we are making parallel universes. The branches make parallel universes.
Yeah.
And even going so far as to have people in one universe in the past being like, well, if you fuck off with the time stones, we're going to be without them. And then one of the characters be like, all right, we'll take them, we'll use them, and then we'll bring them back because it's time travel. So we'll be back instantly, and then you will put them back.
The moment where Tony gets to meet his dad as a younger man, kind of cool.
Yeah, cool.
Because you get a sense that his dad knows who he is.
I'll tell you one thing, though. Avengers breaks their time traveling rules at one point. One specific point they break their rules. It's when Captain America comes back old.
Yes.
He was meant to come back on the platform.
Yeah.
Because he was on the bench, being like, he actually stayed in the past and grew old. Now he's here. It's like, he would have done that in a different universe because he changed it by staying there. So he could not have grown old in this universe where Bucky and Sam were waiting for him.
Yeah.
So that's the one part where it all breaks apart. If he had come back on that platform, old, perfect. It would have been airtight time
if it had hung around for a few years and then popped up on the platform.
Yes.
Wasn't that a lovely moment though?
It was. I can see like why they did it. Like in the cinema when I was watching it, I wasn't thinking about paradoxes. It was only like days later when I was thinking about it, like, oh yeah, that does make sense. It was great in the moment.
Does create this really funny idea of a universe in which Cap knows about all the world's atrocities. And he is Captain America still, right? Like, he's still super.
I mean, he might have retired.
Well, but this is what I'm suggesting. It's the timeline that he did that in is a timeline whereby he knew about all the world's atrocities and was a hero and just sat in his house with his missus going, fuck 9/11. Well, come on. Like,
I feel like
Captain America, he knew everything that was going to happen, right?
But if you want to do the bit, I'll do the bit. It's like, yeah, Captain America put his foot up. It's like, I've done enough. I've done my part. If I put my nerd glasses on or I'm pushing them up my nose and go, actually.
Well, I suppose he did just save half the people in the universe.
Well, no,
didn't he?
I think in that universe, he'd just tell Peggy, who was part of S.H.I.E.L.D. He'd be like, this is happening.
Yeah.
You guys handle it. I'll tell you everything that's going to happen. You guys go and take care of it. I'm putting my feet up.
It's like that, you know, Jesus Christ.
I do know Jesus Christ.
The fuck off.
Got him.
I forget one thing. I can't recall one thing, and you're just like straight on it. Enigma.
Yep.
The people who broke the
Enigma code, yeah. Turing.
Yeah, Turing and his team.
Yep.
Then had to be really quiet about it. Because of course, if they intercepted, if they used it too often, the Germans would know, and within a day there'd be a new code.
So they had to allow some successful bombings on like their ships and stuff.
They had to allow a bunch of it because they had to, and they couldn't tell senior command because senior command was just take control of the machine and use it, and so they made a decision that they wouldn't tell anyone that they'd broken Enigma,
and they had to make the judgment call when something came along big enough. They were like, we will now reveal that we know that broke the code.
But even then, they were surreptitiously putting stuff in. They weren't actually telling anyone they'd broken the code. It's wild. Like, and again, I'm not sure how much of that is just the Benedict Cumberbatch film, and how much of it is apocryphal, and how much of it is genuinely history. But that concept of like having the power to save life, but knowing that you can save more life, but by not exercising it. It's just such a fascinating concept, isn't it?
And on a very big tangent, do you know Mark Wahlberg said that if he was on the 9/11 flights, he would have beat the shit out of the terrorists and saved the day? He said that.
Did he?
In a public forum.
Did he?
Yeah. He was like, if I was on those planes, I would have fucked up those terrorists and no one would have died. Like,
MC Marky Mark said that.
Oh, yeah.
Fuck me. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Horrible event, but at least we've got this one really stupid thing about Mark Wahlberg to laugh about.
Fuck me. Do we actually know what happened on those flights? Or have they kept that?
I think that's another podcast.
Well, yeah, because you'd expect that either we know nothing or we'd have a really detailed blow-by-blow, which is going to be the worst fucking biopic ever made. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, some filmmaker somewhere is going to want to make a name for themselves and make a film about it, and you're like, come on, mate.
I think they did it. They did like the post-crash recovery of the buildings, that kind of thing, you know?
Oh, have they done that?
Oh, yeah, they've done a couple of those, yeah. Like the city coming together and, you know, like dealing with the aftermath and the rescue workers and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So they got a film out of it, but...
I know there's an actor who used to be a New York City fireman.
Steve Buscemi.
Steve Buscemi.
It's one of the top Reddit things that keeps getting mentioned, like to the point that it's now a joke in itself.
Oh, is it really?
The joke
That's
is
so funny.
Typical Reddit. Like, did you know Steve Buscemi was a firefighter and he helped 9/11? Like,
yeah, that's wild.
What I say, helped rescue and deal with.
He didn't.
He
wasn't involved.
Orchestrate.
He wasn't involved.
Just to be clear. But
back to the comic.
Back to the franchise. It feels like we're looking at the whole franchise in this. We'll get into the comic a little bit, but
well, I feel like we've already talked about the comic. It's not very good.
Oh, I've got some specific dialogue issues because that was my biggest bugbear. But just to get some other examples of like the crazy storytelling that happens here.
Yeah,
like there's the time traveling ball pit is one thing. In the games, one of the games had an ending where it ended with a lockbox, so a box with like two locks on it, and it basically had this kind of like some character saying, "Ooh, it's not time to open this yet," or something like this. It was like, "I will fix you. I'll put you back together." Something ominous like that, and a lockbox. So very obvious. What's in the box? What's in the box? You know, that thing.
Yeah.
He never addressed it.
Oh, cool.
He never went back to it.
I mean, I'm a fan of an unsolved mystery, but it kind of feels a bit
when
flat.
You're like, "Ooh, what's in the box?" and then just never come back to it. This isn't like Pulp Fiction with the briefcase, because that was a fun thing for like.
Yeah.
But that was just a little side part, wasn't it? Like that was a.
I love how he finishes one game with what's in the box, and the next game he's like, "Time traveling ball pit, let's go."
Well, that was a book, so.
Oh right, okay,
Different
sorry,
thing.
yeah.
But example of that, and one thing that I kind of remember as well is one of the latest games. It's called Security Night, I think. first person, but big moving around a sandbox, big Fazbear, Mal type theme park kind of thing. Naturally bigger in the series.
Yeah, because it needed to get bigger, I suppose. Yeah.
That was the latest one, and like still Five Nights, but whole new franchise within the story of the universe or whatever. We're into like robots and AI and all that bollocks now. One thing I remember is I'm a big fan of the game reviewer Zero Punctuation by Artsy.
Huge fan too.
And
Ben Yahtzee Croshaw.
He described that game as one of the worst games he's ever played in his life. And I don't mean like...
Doesn't he describe every game as one of the worst games he's ever played?
He describes most of them as just generally bad. He said that he made, I think, this his worst for the year.
Right, one of his cheers and jeers of the year.
And not just on this is a badly designed game or whatever, like as in the core concept or like what they were going for. It literally was like the buggiest game, like the most broken, freezing... just badly produced game he's ever played. And I feel like that's not far off a lot of the games generally. Like, when they're simplest...
They're not that well made.
When they're simplest, so like the core mechanic of the first one was, you are static in a room with controls, and if you do the right things, you keep the things from jumping out at you. So, in that sense, he kind of nailed it there by balancing, like, the game and the story with the mechanics, everything like that.
Yeah.
By naturally having to go bigger and bigger with each game, he's now got to the point like it has to be a big open sandbox game now. It's like you can't make those, or you can't make those well, put it that way. And there's going to be a lot of, if there's any, I'd be surprised, but if there's any actual like Five Nights at Freddy's proper fans listening, they're probably going to be pretty pissed off at what I'm saying right now. Because for them,
super vocal.
Yeah, for them it's just, we love this shit, don't criticize it. I don't think they can actually defend some of the aspects, but for them, if it's about Five Nights, it's great. So this is just to get across an idea of like, even though this is a somewhat popular franchise, or at the very least has a cult fan base, I don't think any of it really stands.
None of it's that good.
None of it, I don't think, stands up by itself. For me, the exception of the first game is like a well-made indie darling kind of video game.
Yeah.
But shouldn't have taken off as much as it did past that. The lore is a mess. Some of the games aren't that great. I don't think the books are written that great. If I'm
we don't know.
honest.
We've not read them.
We've not read them. But if this is what I was saying before, if the dialogue is the same in the comic as it is in the book,
dialogue's piss poor.
Yes,
consistently bad.
That was the worst part of it for me, I would say.
And the whole.
Did you notice at the beginning it did not bother to do a sometime earlier after the flash forward and then flash back?
Yeah, no, the timeline's all over the place.
Normally that's like the basic like 1 week earlier.
It does that a couple times, but it doesn't consistently do it. I think so. It very obviously sets up this interesting sub-narrative whereby Charlie's dad obviously owned Freddy's and is obviously dead, and it becomes quite apparent that all the kids went missing at Freddy's, right?
Some kids, and enough to be worried. More than one.
And enough that it would arouse suspicions. And there's an obvious interesting subplot there that, like, did her dad do it?
Yeah.
And...
which I do think was not that clear.
Well, this is the thing. They didn't do anything with it. There is one moment where her and Carlton... the one who... is it Carlton or is it the other lad? There's two blokes who look relatively similar. One of them's super into Charlie. The other one is...
the one who's in Charlie is thinner, and Carlton, I think, was a bit wider.
Yeah, so it's the other one.
Yeah.
And they're sat on her childhood bed. And he says, by the way, I don't think your dad did it.
Right.
And that's the only time we get to see that.
Yeah.
But obviously, a bunch of kids start going missing in a creepy fucking pizza place with all these animatronics. The key suspect would be the bloke who owns it, right?
Yeah.
And so they reference it, and they're obviously teeing up for it, but they don't do anything with it, and none of the other characters show any indication that they think her dad might be involved, or that they're wary of her and in the way that they would be. And so they're setting up this kind of weird, slightly creepy, tragic backstory with Charlie where, you know, she was super involved in everything that happened in an indirect way, but they don't do anything with it. And then she just casually turns around to her friend who's been friends with her for years and she has all this shared trauma with, and goes, I had a twin brother.
Yeah.
And he's like,
I know this exactly.
oh, did you?
Yeah.
And then they go to the original restaurant that her dad opened that her own brother disappeared from. And they're like, just super casually like, oh, should we go get some dinner and head back then? People are going to be worried about us. You're like, what? None of like...
She's like, I think I think my twin brother was kidnapped by the same guy who you saw. Anyway, shall we race back? Shall we race home?
Yeah.
Like, it's in a breath.
Yeah, and it just doesn't... Yeah, the whole plot of the thing doesn't make any sense, and none of the character motivations particularly make any sense.
Tonally, it's extremely inconsistent.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're all super willing to go back to Freddy's a bunch of times, and it's super easy to get into Freddy's. And they discover that there's a security guard working there as if somebody isn't employing this dude. And they built a mall around it, and it's just like none of it makes a lick of fucking sense.
I think this is literally trying, and I strongly suspect, and again, maybe we'll have to get a copy of the book to verify this. I feel like the book is probably just this, like these events exactly, and the same dialogue and everything. If it is, I feel like it was written in a way where it's just, he kind of, this Cawthon guy was just writing it, and then went, oh bollocks, I forgot, I need to foreshadow this part here. So he just goes back and just jams it in the dialogue. In like, oh shit, I need to make Charlie extremely uncomfortable and almost PTSD for this one line, and then she just goes back to fine. Like she's like laughing, and someone's like, "Ooh, are we all right to mention Freddy's?" And she's like, "I'm fine, don't worry about it." And then they're like, mention something. It's like she's like, "Oh my god, I'm having a panic attack." And then she goes outside, and they're like, "Hey, what about we go to Freddy's?" She's like, "Great idea, love it, let's go." It's like it's just her emotions switch constantly from like fine to distraught to laughing and joking.
And then she talks about when her dad died, and they all talk about it as if it's a suicide, but she says she went in the house and saw, and you see a panel of one of the animatronics with no suit on it holding a knife.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? I mean, that's like, that should be so much more of a big deal in this creepy narrative you're trying to make.
See, I think I was confused, but I think I took the wrong meaning from that. I immediately went to I, Robot. You remember the Will Smith film?
Yeah.
I thought he was like, he set up an animatronic to stab him.
Sorry. I, Robot, the Will Smith film, not the Isaac Asimov novel.
No, the Will Smith film.
Oh, Ryan. Yeah. Ryan!
That's what I'm referencing.
Oh, God. No. I, Robot is a classic sci-fi novel written by Isaac Asimov. Who's like
it might have been before the film was made, but now it's the Will Smith film.
It's not that it might have been, it's that it is, and it's really brilliant. It's really great, and the Will Smith film is not that great.
It's now the source text so that the Will Smith film was based on.
Why'd you do this to me? Why'd you do these things to me? Why'd you upset me like this?
Should I comfort you with in a they're kind of way, but the theirs are they are.
Oh no, it's not fair. It's not fair. Not fair.
So in the Will Smith film, it turns out that the creator got the robot to kill himself. I thought it was that. I thought it was like he wanted to kill himself, but he didn't have the guts, so he made the animatronic. I think I've got the wrong idea now.
Well, no, I think that makes sense because I mean within the context of the text, if we're believing everything that everybody's saying, and it's like
they're quite literal at times.
Yeah, and they use the word suicide a bunch of times, then we are to believe that he programmed one of his own animatronics to kill himself. But it just looked super brutal. But again, she recollects that memory and talks about her dead twin and goes back to this place that would have been wholly traumatizing with such relative ease, to the extent that the very last scene is her and this guy who tried to kiss her when she was 6 by the tree, going to her dad's grave. And then he looks at her and goes, so, are we going to see each other again? And you're like, what the fuck is going on? That's not how you'd respond. You wouldn't be like, oh, I've taken this girl to her dad's grave. Let's see if I can get some fucking tail.
I did not read that at all in that line. I think that might have been if you had that in your head before you read it kind of thing. I interpret it, here's how if I was an actor, this is how I would have done the line reading. I would have been like, are we ever going to see each other again? Like a very like worried like friend of like, am I going to see you again kind of thing. I did not read that as like, Yeah,
So-
DTF? Like, I did not get that at all.
Are we gonna see each other again?
Yeah, I didn't get that at all.
That's all because I don't know. I
I thought that was like a genuine, like, after like a distraught, terrifying experience, and now it's all over. Him generally wondering, is she just going to run away from the town again for years, or is he going to see her again? That's what I got.
Even that doesn't really make a whole lick of sense.
It's clunky dialogue, for sure. I'm not defending it on that way. I'm just saying I didn't get sexual overtones from it like you did. That's all I'm saying.
Look, Ryan, everything.
You go in the, what's his name? The psychologist.
Freud,
the Freudian route, yeah.
I don't think that was a key tenet. Well, it kind of was, so I don't know.
It was his whole thing, wasn't it, basically?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, Freud's one of those who people talk about Freud without actually understanding a lick of what he wrote.
The problem is, you tell him about your dream, and he say it was about one thing, when actually it was about your mother.
We Freud jokes, guys.
It's one of my only psychologist jokes, sir.
How did that make you feel?
Confused.
What, confused because you want to have sex with your mum?
No, confused about this text.
Yeah, well, fucking A. Yeah. But no, it's just, I mean, we could have a whole conversation about how poor the dialogue is.
Oh, I've got notes. I've got examples.
But at this point, I don't think it matters because the dialogue is sitting within the context of a story, which in itself doesn't make any sense.
So there's some beats that I'm like, this was clunky dialogue, but I see what they were trying to do. And then there's other parts where I'm like, do you not understand how human conversation works? Like, so here's like, one of the examples I made was at one point they're looking at they've snuck into the old thing, which again is built on an old mall, but there's still ways into it, like which is very confusing in itself, but fine, I'll take that. The one part they go, oh, they're taller than I remember, standing next to the animatronics. They're taller than I remember. Few pages before, Charlie is like, oh, I remember hugging the animatronic. That was nice.
And then they said, I never got that. It's because you never got that close to them.
Yeah, so yeah. One of them says they're taller than I remember. And then Charlie goes, oh, we know because we never got that close to them. That's why they seem taller. It's like, you just said that you hugged them as a kid.
And then she said that she hugged one and she got the yellow fur on it. And they're like, Freddy's brown.
Yeah. And that later, I think that was a clunky way of implying something later on.
Yeah, but the yellow rabbit was always the one being murdery.
But the yellow bear, they suspect, was someone else or the dad.
This is the thing, though. What?
Exactly. And these are, again, these are questions that are still being posed by YouTubers who literally is their job to study this text and the games and try and determine. The best guess right now is that there is what's known as a golden Freddy, who is like the two individual spirits that have been melded together within the golden Freddy suit. That's the leading theory right now. And even that is being debated and argued. So, and that's just in the games. So fuck knows if that's continued over to the books or not.
Because we then get to a point where they say, oh, Michael's in the suit. You're like, okay. And then the policeman's like, well, I need to go, and super cash, everyone's smiling. Yeah. And the policeman's like, oh, I need to go back in and recover my colleague.
And we just watched a man die.
Yeah.
You like heard his screaming and everything.
And he's like, so Charlie, do you think we should, do something about this? And then this presumably like adolescent, teenager, young person says, nah, I think it's all, I think we've put a bow on it. And they're like, cool, no worries. And you're like, what?
Less paperwork for me.
Yeah. And you're like, but we just had a revelation that a kid that we thought was dead for many years is in a suit in that building. And his own father, no, it's not his dad, but like his friend's dad is like, totally cool with not following up on that one.
And one of the police officers died, and a guy who was maybe almost certainly responsible for the disappearance of children years ago
is in there potentially dead.
Yeah.
And a bunch of teenagers have just killed him, and the cop is like, yeah, I'm not going to look into any of this.
I tell you what.
It's awful, right? It's so bad.
Just to give it its due, one thing I did like.
Oh no, go on then.
How the suit Springtrap went off after it was taken off the guy.
Yeah, after it came off Coulson.
I did like the display of like, this is what would have happened if it would stayed on.
Yes.
And then that did feed into when it happened later to the bad guy.
Totally fine. And
I'm giving like any part that worked for him, like, I gotta give it credit because I'm ripping it apart otherwise.
And the thing with the cameras, right, obviously weirded me out a little bit until you've just explained to me that was like a core gameplay loop in the original game. So that makes sense now. But the fact that they walked in and very quickly Charlie was... So very quickly when they went back in, they just found Carlson on the floor. And you were like, you guys very nearly didn't bother. You
guys were running around before this, weren't they? Or did they go straight to the cameras that time? The third time?
God, mate, I don't know.
Who knows?
I literally finished reading this...
A couple of hours ago.
Yeah, I finished reading this at 7:30. We're now at 9:30. And I haven't got a scoop what happened in any of it anymore.
Yeah. One thing, again, like, just going to my notes, I'm just finding all these inconsistencies. Like I said earlier, Charlie at one point was having PTSD at the mention of Five Nights at Freddy's Fazbear's, the pizzeria.
And then she went in and was just loving it.
And then she's like, let's go back twice. Twice by choice and a third time by necessity.
Yeah, it just... And like, the way that her trauma is displayed is just nonsensical. Like, she doesn't act like a person experiencing trauma. And that's not to say that there is any one way for a person to experience trauma. There are a million different ways that trauma will manifest, and psychology is deeply complicated, and human beings are very complicated. But these human beings aren't very complicated, Ryan.
It was literally one mention.
Yeah.
And then it was flashbacks to her dad stuff, but it didn't. That was just kind of like, here's what the backstory is. It never felt like this is the reason for her current day PTSD or anything.
And we never really find out what happened to her mum.
No, she was just gone.
Yeah, she was just gone. Like, her twin died, mum disappeared, dad died, aunt took her, mum's not in the picture anymore. Yeah, no, it doesn't...
I'll give it another credit as well, for one of you. The outline, the black outline or the shadow of the rabbit costume, that I did think was at least looked creepy. Like, that was like in the kind of... It was doing what it was meant to do.
Does it get the award for the lead, the most perfectly formed turd?
I give it a little more than that. In the sense that it's like, this piece of art is doing what it's meant to be doing.
Fair enough. I'm not here to try and find something I liked about this book.
I'm more just kind of crediting, like, this was fine, this worked. Yeah. I feel like when I'm shitting on the rest of it, I'll be like, that was fine.
No, and we both do that. I think we're both guilty of that. But no,
it's fundamentally bad as a comic book.
It's fundamentally flawed as a story, I think.
Yes.
I would be interested to see if what is happening here is that there was this beautifully complex narrative about trauma in the novel that in being distilled down into a comic book hasn't.
I think the way it uses trauma in the books, from my very limited understanding, it's just this. It's like, they don't like the mention of this part that hints to something in their backstory, and it's not an actual like display of trauma or anything like that.
Because to borrow the parlance of Inception, we're 2 dreams deep on this one. This is an adaptation of a novel, which is in its own turn an adaptation of a video game, right? So we're like, it's an adaptation of an adaptation. You often don't see that in media.
I mean, I feel like that's something more common these days.
Yeah, but no, because you see one thing that's put into lots of different mediums, right? The idea that somebody adapted a video game into a novel and then did a straight adaptation of that novel into a comic book. Yeah. Instead of just writing a wholly independent comic based in the same universe as the original game, right?
Yeah. I would say when you said it about cash grab, I think this comic book is a cash grab. I don't know enough to say whether the book is or not.
Well, we've not read it.
No.
It's that simple. We're talking about a book that neither of us have read, and I don't want to speculate too much. This guy could be a great writer, and they could be really great books. I mean...
From what I've seen, I don't think so.
Well, by all intents and purposes, he made a good video game. This is the thing. Like, he was a good enough creative that he made an interesting and compelling video game. From what you've told me about it, it sounds like it had a good core gameplay loop.
Yeah. If you like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Stress that.
And so, but yeah, this is just a really unsuccessful piece of fiction. Like, I mean, one of the things that I will look for when I'm reading, and, you know, I think it's part of having an English degree, is that I read with an eye towards metaphor. And there's nothing really that interesting happening under the surface here. Like, this is all plot. This is meant to be a thriller or a horror. And so it's really plot driven and really plot heavy.
The only parts I think that aren't plot are when Charlie's being chased by animatronics.
Yeah, well, that's all plot, isn't it? That's what
But
plot
it's
is.
attempting to take a bit of like, ooh, terror, what's going to happen? And then it goes back to plot very quickly. Because they don't even like solve the problem of the animatronics or anything.
Well, no, they don't make any attempt to, because they kind of have some revelations about what's going on there and then decide that it's all been resolved.
Yeah.
It just doesn't... And when
it gets solved beyond them.
Yeah.
Except Charlie flicks the switch on the costume. That's like the most she does to affect the story, really, isn't she?
And murdering whoever's in the costume without any inkling of who that might be.
Yeah.
That could have been Michael.
I think they know that it's the guy, Dave, the security guard.
Well, do they?
I think so.
Is that made clear?
I genuinely, I'm going to say I think so. I can't be asked to go through and actually
I don't know that that's made clear. And there is a point where somebody says, I think that's Michael in the yellow rabbit costume.
That's when he's talking about the empty bear costume, the yellow.
Right,
he's saying, I think our dead childhood friend Michael is in there, as in like his spirit.
But again, obviously that's a really consistent thing from the game.
Yeah.
And so to anybody who is a Five Nights at Freddy fan, they'd be like, oh, I've been waiting for that. That makes sense. But reading this as an isolated text, no indication.
Not clear.
Not of like
No.
the suit doesn't do anything that would indicate that it's being possessed by their friend's soul.
I mean, it talks to him, but you just assume it's a person in a suit, don't you?
Well, fucking A, yeah. And it just doesn't make any sense.
What else doesn't make sense? There's one line where someone says, I can't even remember what the context is, but someone says, lightning strikes twice, but not murder.
Yeah, I remember that.
What the fuck do you mean by that?
Well, yeah, because
what could you possibly mean?
Because they consistently refer to Dave as being a serial killer. And so in that instance, murder unfortunately does strike twice.
Murder happens probably far more commonly than lightning in some degrees.
You know what? Really interested to know if there is, because if there's a country in the world where there's more murder than there is lightning.
I would say globally, there's more murders than lightning strikes.
Do you think?
Well, because that only happens when there's like a storm cloud that's producing lightning. So across the world, murders all the time.
Yeah,
even
but
if you had a particularly spicy storm cloud.
But there's subtropical countries that have entire seasons where it's just basically rainstorms all the time.
Have we just discovered the new doors or windows?
What, more murders or lightning strikes?
What do you think?
That wouldn't be a great opener for Tinder.
I mean, now we're going to have to try out anyway.
Right, give us your phone.
I also thought it was very weird when they got caught by the security guard, who somehow didn't catch them the previous night, even though they made a lot of noise when they moved a bookshelf or something.
Well, they were just bumbling about, making a bunch of noise the entire time they were there the first time.
And he didn't strike for some reason earlier, and then he did later. But when he catches them, and then Charlie's like, hang on a minute, guys, wait a minute. What if you came with us? And if I was one of the group, I'd be like, that's the dumbest bargaining I've ever heard for this kind of situation.
Yeah.
If you're trespassing somewhere and the security guard goes, oi, stop there, is anyone's first thought going to be, hang on, trespass with us?
But he does.
No, it should not have worked. Like, this is a world apparently where that has a chance of working because it did.
It reminds me of like the guards in Skyrim where it's like, oi, I hear someone. And they like bumble about in the corner of the room for a bit.
That the Skyrim guys, I think, make more sense. All right, I get why the security guard did what he did. I get why.
Do you?
I get because like he's caught them. And they're like, "Hey, come with us." He'd be like, "I'm gonna fucking murder these people anyway."
Yeah,
so
I suppose they're clearly a bit too trusting.
I might as well befriend them so they think I'm harmless or whatever. The fact that Charlie is like, "Hang on, before you do us in for justifiably trespassing when we shouldn't be, why don't you join us in our crime?" But like if the police, if you were robbing a bank and the police stopped and you were like, we'll cut you in if you join our gang and help us rob the bank.
That almost makes more sense because that is actually how that kind of stuff works.
Yeah, but I think the police would at least be like, even if I wanted to, I can't do it here now in front of it. Like,
no, we need to go have a shady conversation in a downtown bar first.
You should have asked me this before.
You okay that you pay the police off first?
Exactly.
Idiot criminals are getting stupid.
Yes. That's what I mean. There's a lot of weird, like, oh, we need to get from A to B. How do we make this happen? And then they're just doing stuff that doesn't make sense.
Do you wonder if people moving away from using cash en masse is making it harder for police officers to take bribes.
No, because they do them online now, and they're less traceable. It's like Bitcoin and stuff now, isn't it?
Well, so you think
or
that,
NFTs?
So you think that like
you pay them off in bored apes?
There's just this.
These are worthless now.
I just love the idea that like PC Plod, so that he can take bribes, has a little card reader, and like you have a conversation, and he just like punches a few numbers in and pushes it across the table, and you just tap your card.
There's a larger joke there about the blatant corruption of police. That they're just like, yeah, I've got a card reader for my bribes now. Like, well, it's got its own account. It's the account is called bribes in capital letters or something.
Bribes with a Z.
Yeah. I'd more lean on that route than the cashless society part. It's just like, we're so blatant, we're just making it easy for ourselves. Also, what I didn't understand was...
Oh, God, are we still...
There's a couple of these.
All right,
how does security guard, when he's like, if the spring traps go, then they're going to, basically fuck you up and tear your body apart. And then the guy's like, how do you know? And he basically reveals these scars on his body. It's like, this is how I know.
Yeah, I was like, we've seen a bunch of times throughout the comic book.
But I was like, I get like the foreshadowing stuff, like fair enough, that's fine. But when he showed that off, and after having explained what they were in relation to, I was like, did you get impaled several times in the suit? Because if you did, you literally just said that will kill you very painfully and slowly.
And it didn't kill him.
Yeah. Like, what's happening? Is he undead? Because if he is, fine. That could track for this universe.
Well, 100% I clocked that as well. But by that point, because we're talking that's right at the end of the second volume, I was so checked out.
Oh, this was, by that point, I'm just like collecting things to like basically point out.
Is that the level at which you're enjoying this at that point?
I think part of me was kind of like, how is this going to work out in relation to the games and the stuff I already knew? That was like the most interest I had, was like, what are they going to do here?
So can you imagine what it must have been like for me with no knowledge of the games reading this comic book?
I mean, I could imagine it just being like a really bad attempt at a horror story.
Well, yeah, because but again, when you get into the like people being possessed, the animatronics being possessed by the souls of the dead, and the whole like logic of how the cameras work and stuff like that, it all just didn't make any sense. And obviously now that we've talked about it, I'm like, right, so a Five Nights at Freddy's fan would come into it with all this context.
Yeah.
And suddenly this story makes
a little more
yeah,
sense.
Like you've filled in a couple plot holes for me. But in general, the whole thing is just rife.
Yes. And this is why I always say the value of having you as I don't know the previous stuff, does it still stand on its own?
This comic book reminds me of these jeans that I keep seeing in TikToks, where they have almost no material at the front.
Yep.
Right, so it's just the back of the jeans and then two little cuffs that hold them on at the ankles.
It's like the reverse of us as chaps.
Yeah, literally, like the whole leg is exposed. And you go, at this point, the jean is more hole than it is jeans.
Yeah.
This comic book is more plot hole than it is plot.
Yes.
Like, just every...
In big and small. Like,
yeah, like almost every utterance by every character.
It's weird they say it like that. Like those kind of things.
Yeah, and it just kind of like every kind of plot revelation you have introduces more questions than it does answers. In a really bad way, because that can be really fun and really interesting if you've got this really intricate plot and you're like, wow, everything I find out gives me more questions. Whereas here it's like, no, everything that I find out is incongruent with everything that came before and doesn't make any sense. What I'm realizing is that is exactly what the people who are into this franchise want. Because it seems like half the fun of being a Five Nights at Freddy's fan is creating headcanon around the lore and finding ways to fill in these plot holes. And this book, it gives them plenty of material to do that with.
I would say you're almost nailing on the head. I would only slightly amend it to be right in the next thing. So to have your headcanon confirmed or your theory confirmed.
Yeah.
And I think it's the similar kind of thing of like reading and be like, ooh, this part is going to be called back to later in this. To the point where I just realized one of my last notes was, did we resolve the twin brother storyline?
No.
And here's the thing as well. One thing that should be mentioned is this is the first of a trilogy of books. So
I could only find two of them though. Is the third one unreleased?
I think that we've only had 2 comic adaptations. There might be more.
There's going to be more of this.
Maybe. I mean, there's like 10 books. So
oh,
maybe.
God. When did this come out?
2020, so a few years ago. So they only started doing the comic adaptations like 3 years ago. I think the first book came out earlier than that.
God, imagine you're in a global pandemic and you spend money on a comic book to take you out of the awful things that are happening. And you end up reading this.
To be fair, this could distract you from like a pandemic or whatever, because you're just like, why are they saying it like this? Like,
no,
it's just more
I think if I was reading this during the pandemic, I'd be like, right, can we put the news on, please?
Yeah, something less depressing.
Yeah, literally.
The only reason I mentioned this is first of a trilogy is there's some more stuff happens in this story to this character in this trilogy of books.
Yeah.
But the difference is, if you had a story, like a book story, it's like, ooh, I can't wait to see the second one because then they'll resolve this mystery. Normally, to like the twin brother thing, normally you'd have something in the first book to indicate we are going to get to it in the second book. So normally at the end, Charlie would be like, oh, it's a shame. Maybe that guy also took my brother, and maybe he might not be dead. Maybe he might still be alive or something. And then another character goes like, oh, I guess we'll have to wait and see, and maybe something will reveal about that in the next book,
Yeah.
And it didn't even bother doing that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Here's one last little thing.
Okay, is it going to make me happy or more sad?
I think you might find it funny, but not in a good... I don't know. Let's see.
I'm bracing myself.
I'm fairly certain from watching the videos who, again, like the theory YouTube videos using the books to predict the stuff in the games.
Yeah.
I'm almost certain, and I might double check this after this, maybe not. I'm almost certain that a reveal that happens in this trilogy is that Charlie turns out to herself be an animatronic.
Oh, fuck off.
And specifically,
is it when that bloke tries to give her a length?
What part are you talking about?
Well, at some point, her matey, who got horny in the graveyard...
The one who asked her if he'd ever see her again in a solemn, friendly way.
No, he was fucking thirsty. Let's just get this out there. That was pure thirst talking.
Did you ever see this sounds like a massive tangent. Did you ever see the band Twisted Sister? Did the song
I know where you're going. I know where you're going with this.
They testified in front of Congress to parents who thought their lyrics were too obscene and dirty for children. And the parents pointed to one of their songs, said, see, it talks about like knives and cutting and sedation and drugs and all these things. This should be banned. And then the band testified from Congress, and they were like, that song is about our drummer's surgery. We didn't know if he was going to make it or not. And so the song is about surgical stuff. And the guy basically said, if you're reading sexual stuff into this or whatever, that's probably more on you as the listener than us as the band.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, if you're overreading sexual overtones in this book, I don't think that's the book's fault. It's one of the few things that I won't call the book out for doing.
Are you trying to imply that I'm a pervert?
I'm just saying, I think you've misinterpreted the tone in some parts. And that's not necessarily your fault, because the tone is everywhere. I think just the one place it didn't go was overtly sexual.
So how do we have the character revelation that Charlie is an animatronic?
All I know is, I don't remember the exact revelation. So her dad obviously made the animatronics. I think the reveal is something along the lines of, he had a daughter, Charlie, who died. Obviously is another dead kid, because it's Five Nights at Freddy's. Can't throw a rock without hitting a dead kid in this universe.
Yeah, fucking A.
And he then makes animatronics and builds like AI enough so they believe they're real, but he can only make them, they can't grow. So he makes like a baby one, and then a young child one, and then a teenager one.
Do you reckon that's the point at which his wife left him?
I mean, what? He's spending too much time in the basement working on animatronics, and then one of them stabs him. Maybe that one is one of the Charlies.
Oh, that's grown-up Charlie.
Yeah, it could be.
Oh, we've spent an hour talking about Five Nights at Freddy's.
We're now theorizing.
We're already making stuff up.
We're on board now. We love this franchise now.
Oh, fuck off.
Yeah. I thought you'd... That's on the level of like time-traveling ball pit, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just right up there.
Yeah.
So what do we think of this? Would we recommend it?
Not at all. I think it's the worst one we've done in this month. And to wrap up spooky season, we should rank what we've done.
Yeah, so Maniac of New York is the best.
Yep. Harrower after that. Second.
Which one?
Harrower was the serial killer, you call it the Hot Fuzz ending.
I don't know if it would be Harrower or Neighbours.
I think Harrower is a bit better than Neighbours.
Okay, yeah, so Maniac of New York, Harrower, Neighbours.
And then what's the worst, Five Nights or Spider-Man One More Day?
Oh, this beats out Spider-Man One More Day. Like, this is worse than Spider-Man.
Okay, fair enough. This is worse than the worst superhero comic.
Do you not think?
I mean, I'm not saying it's definite one way or the other. I'm saying there's a debate to be had, I think. Because with Spider-Man, it has like, is it a worse thing when the level of Spider-Man comics generally was at least high enough that One More Day brought it down and destroyed it? This is normal Five Nights at Freddy's. Like, this is like...
Spider-Man One More Day was a big swing and a miss.
Yes.
Like, when we talked about it, we talked about the fact that actually the middle of the comic was really interesting.
Mm.
And there was a lot in there that could have been great had it just been a little bit better in different places.
So is it more bittersweet that it could have been good and fumbled the ending? And not just fumbled the ending, but studio or, publisher interfere into like, we need to make these changes and it's going to be bad. To the point, the writer wanted his name taken off One More Day. Scott Cawthon is still proudly just, he's like, I wrote this.
I think that makes it worse. I think this is worse. I think this is
fair,
the worst.
That's fair. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying.
This is the one's bad.
Yeah, I could say that. Although this has far more of a fan base than the Ones franchise did.
Oh yeah, they're going to come
And the ones
for
that
us.
attempted to franchise, I don't know if they actually did or not, but the ones attempted to franchise by literally saying at the end of the comic, is this a franchise now? Or something?
God, it was bad, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, yeah, this is the worst one we've read.
Okay.
I think the only one that really gets my do you know what's terrible? Even though this is bad, this is so bad that it's better than the Rick and Morty comic we read.
So that's an interesting thing, because I read a few of the later Rick and Morty
Oh,
comics.
I hit
They
they're
got
quite
better.
good. Yeah.
They definitely got better. I think what it was, so in the first ones,
The one we read was a little soulless, wasn't it?
yeah, the first ones, they tried to just make like what they imagined a Rick and Morty comic would look like.
Yeah.
And it was just it was a quick-paced story that didn't really bother...
Going anywhere.
It only went somewhere in the sense of like, let's continue the story. When I jumped to the next writer, who started from volume 3 onwards, they then started being a bit more like slower paced story and actually took the time to tell the story of the characters. It also didn't attempt to be funny or make jokes, which sounds almost antithetical for Rick and Morty
it
comic.
makes sense. I get it.
But the humor was in like just naturally derived from the characters.
Yeah.
The first ones we read, it felt like, and then Rick says a Rick thing, and then Morty says a Morty thing, and then Beth and Jerry have
Which
couples things.
Kind of the way that the show runs.
I think that's how the show runs originally.
Oh man.
And it evolved from there.
So since we talked about Rick and Morty, I've watched the trailer for the new season.
I've seen the first episode.
Oh, is it out?
Yeah, just came out.
So I've experienced the voices now. And it's like, oh, they're just kind of...
The same.
They're the same, but not as good.
I found in the first episode, so it's a very Rick-heavy episode. You don't get as much of Morty except for the beginning. After a while, I completely forgot. Like, it didn't even...
Do they reference it?
No, don't reference it at all.
They don't reference it?
No.
Oh, I mean, that's kind of classy.
I mean, it's not as good as Solar Opposites that I told you how they did it with the voice-changing Ray. I'll show you the clip afterwards, but...
Okay.
Basically,
I mean, like when Big Mouth did it with Missy, they reference it.
Yeah, but they also mixed it slowly over time, didn't they?
Did they?
Yeah, they literally had the both actors did the same lines and they mixed them together and slowly changed the percentage. So it went like 10%, like 90% original actor, 10% new actor, and that slowly changed.
They actually do that.
It slowly
That's
changed.
really clever.
And you can tell when you listen to it that if over the series, at the start of the series, it's very heavier the original actor. And then it slowly, on a scale, shifts to the new actor. So the point was it was trying to slowly bring people aboard over a season rather than just changing it between seasons.
Because they didn't get cancelled for it. They just made an executive decision that we need to have a black woman play this black character.
I think the actress, the original one, who I can't remember. I mean, I would say like the person who played the voice, I can't remember their name, but they are in a lot of stuff. I know them mainly for playing the terrible sister in Parks and Recreations.
Oh shit!
Who does the money please from from the guy who played the Fonz, his character.
So weirdly, we talked about you just I said actor, you said actress. Did you know actress is now an antiquated term?
I did not. I did not receive the update.
Fell out of favour in the noughties.
Really?
Yeah, 100%. Nobody, like, they're all actors now.
But they still use, like, actress in, like, Academy Award.
Yeah, the categories in award ceremonies still...
Which is ridiculous, because, like, I think Chris Rock put it best. He was like, good thing they have this separated, because the women can't act as hard as the men can act.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Seems ridiculous.
But no, yeah, they're all actors now. But yeah, right, so, back to the comic book.
Yeah.
The only one that I would recommend is Maniac.
Yep.
Of everything we read in Spooky Season, the one that, like, gets my recommendation is Maniac of New York. I think I would really like to come back to that one next year.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And read the second volume and maybe even read the whole thing and really do a deep dive into the whole series, talk about it holistically. Like, I found that one really interesting. If you're into that kind of thing, the Harrow is kind of fun, but I'd just watch Hot Fuzz instead.
Harrow, if you like that trope or that the teen slasher, that one, it's a good deconstruction of that.
Yeah. And then Neighbours was fine. But no, how do you feel about Spooky Season? Have you enjoyed it?
I think it's gone well overall. I think we've got quite a bit of diversity across the way. Well,
I now feel like I can quite, with a certain level of authority, talk about horror comics, which I didn't have a Scooby-Doo about to start with. So I definitely
Scooby-Doo being a pivotal horror character trope.
Right. You can't... whenever I do a good one, you can't... like, you should just let it fly under. Do you know what I mean?
I just assume that's the Cockney rhyming slang that you always do.
Well, yeah, but it was...
I didn't have a bloody Scoobies.
I got a Scoob.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was good. But this time it worked.
This time it's appropriate.
Yeah. But no, so thank you for joining us.
For the last ever Spooky Season.
Until 2024.
Yes. If the podcast lasts that long.
Yeah. Well, fucking hell.
One of us could die.
Jesus Christ, Ryan. Fuck me.
It's always a possibility. We could be in Final Destination right now.
So I have hypochondria. So if you do want to enter the Comic Literate Halloween costume competition, send a photograph of yourself in your Halloween costume to comicliterate@gmail.com.
And we know you got the photos, because if you put the F in a costume, what's the point if you're not going to take a photo to put on Facebook or Instagram or...
Yeah, absolutely.
Do I sound like really old when I said Facebook? No one uses that anymore, old man.
You do get extra points if you can send us a screenshot of it uploaded to either MySpace or Bebo.
Yeah.
And
we're all now on an app that you can't even pronounce. It's not even got a word. It's a symbol.
Oh.
It's the Dylan Moran. It's an umlaut above an E that's not there.
It's just an X.
Yeah.
And yeah, leave
the X
us...
sounds cool.
Oh, fuck off. And then leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. 5 stars preferable. Don't care what you say. If it's really offensive, we'll read it out. Thanks so much for joining us for...
Spooky Season, last one. We might have some spooky themed shorts in like a month or two whenever I get around to making them. Just in time for Christmas.
Really incongruent.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening. Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.